Good morning. It is Friday, October 4th, 2024, back here for Daily Shakeup number 961. And today I want to talk about the concept, just the beginning of an introduction to the concept of nonviolent communication, and specifically in the context of email communication. Now, nonviolent communication can be viewed as a bigger topic, and in some ways a simpler topic. A lot of it flows from the work of Marshall Rosenberg. Marshall Rosenberg wrote a book called Nonviolent Communication. I highly recommend it. I will put it in the text, a link to the book itself if you want to learn more. But here's the context that a lot of our communication is in a way violent. And we tend to think of violence as physical violence, but this is really about the nature of psychological violence that shows up in our emails. And it's unnecessary. And typically it's because we're communicating in a reactive moment, in a reactive way, without taking a moment to pause, slow things down, and communicate in a different way. And there was a recent situation that came up where I actually hadn't thought about it in terms of nonviolent or violent communication. And someone else was pointing it out to me around an email communication, something that there was some communication, and I responded to that in a way that was perceived by someone as helpful and nonviolent, rather than escalating it or doing it in a reactive versus responsive way. So it's hard to get into the details, but here's what I want you to think about in terms of a strategy. And first start with this context setting awareness. How often, if you look at the emails that you send, how often would you say that if you took a moment to pause before sending them, you might send them differently, say something differently, maybe even choose not to send them and instead maybe pick up the phone and have a phone call or get on a Zoom or something else, especially when there's some level of emotional charge in it. There's some sort of disconnect in it. I've had as high as 80 to 85%. Someone has said, if I thought about it 85% of the time, I wouldn't send the email at all or wouldn't send it that way. And yet we do because we're in a hurry. And more importantly, we're in a reactive mode, that emotional triggering, even if it's a small way. And when I am in that emotional triggered reactive state, I am pretty confident that I will say something that will have a less than positive impact. It will be at best neutral, but most often negative impact on the communication, on the situation, on the relationship, whatever it is. So we're doing harm to each other and our relationships and our leadership by not following these simple steps. So when you've got that communication coming in or a situation occurs around you where you're going to communicate, in this case, I'm specifically talking about email. Not a great communication tool. I've talked about that before, especially in disconnect situations, but let's say we're going to do it. So first of all, I would encourage you to pause before you even write it. But even after you write it, notice what's going on in your body. Are you feeling the emotion? Are you feeling the charge? Are you feeling yourself maybe tapping harder than normal to say, I'm making this point because you did this, you said this. I've got to either come at you or at minimum defend myself. All forms of what can be violent communication. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pause. We're going to, even after I write it, I'm going to pause, think about it, and move away from it. I'm not going to send it right away. I'm going to step away, either figuratively or literally, go look at something out, even if it's just for 5 minutes, then come back to it, reread it again, and notice again as I'm reading it, am I feeling myself getting amped up? If I am, it's time to say, don't send, or at a minimum, change what you're saying, or maybe go away from the email, do the phone call or the Zoom. The point is, when I can pause, when I can step away, when I can be self-aware and pay attention to what's going on in here as I'm communicating, to minimize the negative impact that comes from what can be received as violent communication. And violent communication does not beget violent communication back. You can still choose, as I did in this situation, to respond in a nonviolent way. And this is so critical. There's such an opportunity here to enhance our relationships, enhance our trust, enhance our leadership by pausing, stepping away, reflecting, and then responding as opposed to reacting. That's it. Think about it. Ponder it over the weekend. Love to hear your thoughts.